Hello, BookTube and all Repairman Jack fans. My name is Nathan. Thank you so much for watching and welcome to my channel. So this is my longer discussion video for book number 6 in the Repairman Jack series, The Haunted Heir. So this is following Hosts, which is book number 5, and then after this, then we get into Gateways, which is book number 7. So if you are not aware of what I'm doing, basically I post 2 different videos for each book in the Repairman Jack series, and I'm trying to do 1 book a week. So this one, it ended up being 2 weeks, just because I got busy with my day job and a bunch of other stuff going on, but I'm hoping to get back to every single week that I've got my 2 videos. So with this one, I have a short spoiler-free review video, which you can certainly go and check out if you have not already watched it. And if you don't want to have this book spoiled in any way in regards to the plot and themes and all of that, then it's best to stop here and go watch the short spoiler-free review video and then read the book, and then you can come back and get my listen to my thoughts on this. So I'm going to start with a brief plot summary. I will try to be fairly brief with that, and then I'm going to get into some of the themes with the book. So what you have to know at the beginning of The Haunted Heir is what happens at the end of Hosts. So at the end of, basically what happens within Hosts is Jack, he re-encounters his older sister Kate. So they have not really talked to each other or seen each other since their mother died, and Jack went off to the city and he essentially became Repairman Jack. So it's something like 15 years between the death of his mother until Host, when he re-encounters his sister. So she ends up being infected with this infection that essentially pulls her into this group mind with these other people. And what you find out is that the otherness has essentially, it is one of the tactics that the otherness has been employing to try to get Earth to flip over to the otherness. So she ends up getting infected with this, in part because her girlfriend, the woman that she loves, she got infected. So then at the end of this, then Kate dies. She dies in an explosion, and without getting too far ahead of myself in the series, Jack believes that this has everything to do with the otherness, that the otherness wants to kill off his family members. So he is assuming, or even if he's not necessarily assuming that, basically he's blaming the otherness for the death of his sister Kate. At the beginning of The Haunted Heir, Jack is grieving. He is mourning for the loss of his sister, and he doesn't want to do anything. So he is, not taking on any jobs. He's not exercising. He's just not really being himself. And you can, of course, understand exactly why. Because, like I say, he's grieving. He's mourning. Now, the book starts where he accompanies Gia to this party with a bunch of her artist friends. One of her friends says that she needs to go to see her psychic medium. So you find out that Jack basically drives a few of them over there. He sits through this whole, spectacle of this psychic medium who goes by the name of Ifasen, Ifasen, I think is how you pronounce it, Ifasen. And Jack is kind of rolling his eyes the entire time because you find out that he has previously worked for a psychic medium, and it's all just a racket. It's of course an elaborate con that is being put on, that they don't actually have psychic abilities, but there's a whole bunch of different tricks that they employ in order to make it seem as though they do. And so this is not the first time in the series that we've seen this, where Wilson goes into he gives us a whole education on these underground illegal schemes or rackets that go on, these businesses that are illegal but they continue to exist. And so this is just another instance of it. So we've seen this before with Monty, or 3-card Monty, where he distinguishes between the two and he explains exactly how the rules of that game function, all the different people who are involved in it. We've seen that, and as far as I understand, I don't know if this is a real thing or not, but I believe that it's real with building hackers, people who go into different buildings and large urban centers and they figure out all the secret compartments to them. So we saw that with Milk Dud. So he gives us this whole illegal underground subculture that exists. And it's the same thing with psychic mediums in this book. So he tells you, here's how they go about doing this. So they've got hidden microphones and hidden cameras. They're watching the sitters, is the clients that they take on, so they call them sitters. And you know, they might steal their social security card and copy it, so that way they know what they can find out all kinds of financial information about the sitter, the person who goes to see them. They might copy a key to their house or to their apartment and then sneak in when they're not home, and then take something, you know, and place it somewhere else in their house, or just hide it in a pretty clever way where the person is forced to go back to the psychic to say, I've lost this really important item and I don't know where it is. And then the psychic, you know, goes through their whole routine and then says, oh, here's where you're going to find it. And then that's, you know, proof that the psychic is actually talented and has this ability. So Jack is kind of sitting through all of this, and he's, you know, fairly sarcastic, but he's allowing them to do their thing. Because you've got Iphison, who's really Lyle Kenton, and then his younger brother Charlie, who's helping him. But before they go in there, Jack and Gia are stopped by a woman and her dog. So it's an Indian woman with a German Shepherd, an Indian woman wearing a sari, and she stops them and she says, don't go in that house. She gives this very grave warning. Of course, any readers of Repairman Jack know this is the lady and her dog, and so she is the mother to everyone on Earth. She watches. She is essentially representing the ally, trying to keep Earth on the side of the ally rather than get flipped over to the otherness. This is all this big cosmic battle that's going on that Jack is slowly becoming more and more aware of, and he's becoming more and more aware of what his role is in all of this. So the second that they cross the threshold, there's this earthquake. The basement of the house, it gets this massive fissure that erupts throughout it, and it seems to be essentially a bottomless pit. And really, we've seen this type of thing before, because we saw this at the end of Conspiracies with the house in Monroe, where it is a pit that just seems to go on and on and on, and really that's going into the otherness itself. So Lyle and Charlie Kenton, the psychic mediums, essentially what happens is they have been threatened by their competition, and they think that that's all that's going on. But it turns out that there's other stuff too, and especially once Jack and Gia cross into the house, even though the lady and, you know, the dog warned them not to do this, they just ignore her because Jack does not recognize her as being the lady and her dog. So they go into the house, and you get this earthquake, and then ultimately what you find out is that the otherness has now become active, essentially, in this house. Skipping ahead, you find out that the house has got a bad history, right? And this is exactly why Lyle and Charlie Kenton bought it, to open up their psychic practice there, because they played it up, saying, like, look at all of this, all of these awful tragic events that have happened here. This gives it extra psychic energy that we can pull from to contact the other side and all of that. They essentially hire Jack to try to deal with their competitor, who seems to be threatening them and intimidating them, like a bullet hole through their window, and attacking them in other ways. So they hire him for that, but there's all kinds of other strange things that are happening. The book is very much, this book is really dealing with cosmic horror, where there's a lot that is, it's, typically then we associate cosmic horror with, like, most famously we associate it with H.P. Lovecraft, where it is not, you're stepping into this strange otherness that the human mind can't really comprehend. And that's essentially what's going on in this house. You have this pit that seems to go forever. You have the television in their house will only get TV shows from the 1980s. No matter what they do, they flip through it, and it's just doing things like that. The plants around their house, they all die. The windows and doors, they open and close on their own. And, you know, they're assuming, Lyle and Charlie are assuming to some degree that it's the competition. But this is where the book starts getting into issues of faith. So Charlie, he is an evangelical Christian. He's a born-again Christian, and he has serious reservations about how they are earning their money. His older brother, Lyle, has no patience for this whatsoever. He is very much, I guess you would call him a rational humanist. He is very much an empiricist. He needs to be able to, through his tactile senses, be able to know if something is real or not, and he has no interest in faith. So Lyle is constantly trying to show all the ways that these strange things that are happening, it's just elaborate tricks done by his competition to try to shut down their practice. He can't bring himself to believe that it could be something else. Charlie, of course, he is rationalizing all of this or explaining all of this within a Christian framework, where he's saying, we are dealing with God and his angels, and then Satan and demons, and that's really what's going on. It is good versus evil. So that's what they think is happening. But as you continue reading, then you realize that there's a whole bunch of other stuff that's going on. So there is this group called the Circle, run by Elibolito. So Elibolito is a leader of this cult where there's 12 of them all together, and what he has told the people in his cult is that if they kill a child every year, within a year, they have to kill one child a year, and there's a certain window, I think it's between the summer and the fall equinox during the full moon. I think I'm getting it right. Then they have to kill a small child, which they call a lamb. But it's not just kill the child. The child has to be alive. They have to cut open the child's chest, extract the heart from the living child, and then cut it up into different parts and then eat it. And if they do this, over something like 30 years consecutively, they will become immortal and essentially invincible, that no one can hurt them. You find out that one of the members of this group, Dimitri, bought this house. I don't know if he bought it or maybe his father owned it. In any case, Dimitri owned this house in the 80s. And what they were doing is they were using this house to kill these children and then to bury their bodies. You also find out that before Dimitri got involved in this group, he was intent on finding any way of being able to live as long as he could, because his father died from pancreatic cancer, and he was terrified, and at a fairly young age, and so Dimitri was terrified that this would happen to him. So he went around the world trying to find all these, places of power, and essentially what he found was the castle from the keep. So this is like where the book's really, really interesting, with the connection between the haunted air and the keep. So he finds out about this place, and what he does is he imports different parts of the wall, the structure of it, with all of the Tau crosses, right, where it's not exactly a cross, it's almost like an uppercase T. And what he does is he imports it into America, and then he puts that in his basement. So he did this before the Circle got involved. So since you've got these very powerful walls, which were containing Rosalam for a very, very long time, they have essentially absorbed all of this power from the Other Ness. As a result, then what ends up happening is when they're killing the children in this place, one of the kids comes back in a ghost form where a lot of her humanity has actually been removed from her, but she comes back in this ghost form. And really what sets her off is that Gia and Jack have entered the house, and as you keep reading, you realize that it's because Gia herself is pregnant with Jack's baby. So it is not just getting the attention of the Other Ness, right? With Jack now being essentially the guardian of Earth for the Ally, but he now has a child as well. So the Ally is actually being tipped off to this also. Essentially, the girl who has been killed, Tara Portman, she comes back. She wants Gia's baby. She said that she was brought back in order to get Gia, in order to take her out, and that there's all this stuff going on with the Other Ness as well. Okay, that's essentially what you've got in the book. You know, there's a whole bunch of other plot elements that are going on here with like the actual competition that Lyle and Charlie are faced with Madame Pomerol, and the way that Jack scams them, and he loves to scam a scammer. So you have that whole interesting thing. You have the way Jack goes after the Circle, Elibolito and Adrian and these other people who are all involved in taking kids, and you find out that Eli and Adrian, they want to take kidnap Vicky, and they want to use her as a lamb. So you have all of these interesting things that are going on all at once, but that's essentially what you have going on in this book. All right, so I want to start getting into some of the themes. So I think that is really significant that the haunted heir, like I'm convinced, I know that it's significant that the haunted heir is following what happens in House. So Jack himself is very much, he doesn't think these big questions. He doesn't spend his days thinking big questions of faith and his place in the universe and big metaphysical questions. He just doesn't bother himself with them. It's not that he is, unintelligent and he can't understand these things. It's just he doesn't. He just doesn't. But I think he's being forced to start thinking about this. Exactly what does happen when a person dies, particularly a loved one? Where is Kate? What's happened to her now? So she's gone, because Jack, the last time that this happened, it was his mother. And so we saw the last time that he had a family member who not only died, but was killed, right? Who was killed, he becomes Repairman Jack. So now you see the death of his older sister, and he was trying to stop this. He was very active. He was not a teenager who was just, kind of literally going along for a ride in the car, right? He was well aware of what was happening, and he couldn't save his sister. So he's going through a whole bunch of stuff to deal with that. And then you get into the haunted heir. And the haunted heir is very much what happens to us after we die. What do we do with faith, with religion, with metaphysics in general, with all of these big questions about our place in the universe? And so this book is really concerned. One of the themes of the book is faith and the afterlife. Specifically, you're getting into people of faith versus people who are rational humanists who rely on empiricism. So empiricism is essentially a branch of philosophy, and I'm really reducing this, but basically it's part of epistemology. So epistemology is basically, how do we know what we know? How do we know if something's true or not true? How do we know what counts as knowledge, what's real and what isn't real? And one of the answers to this is empiricism, which empiricism is essentially relying on your senses, that you know that something's real if you can feel it, taste it, touch it, see it, or smell it. I think I got all 5 of them. So what happens there is that you have one approach, which is you can be a person of faith and you can say, I can't necessarily rely on my physical senses to tell me what's true and what's not true, what's real and what's not real, what counts as knowledge or truth and what doesn't, what's a lie, right? You don't necessarily need to rely on your senses for that. That's kind of the antithesis of being a person of faith. But then on the other hand, then you've got empiricism, where it's saying, well, we know what's true because of what we can actually measure, right, through empirical evidence. Jack is very much an empiricist, but he is constantly being confronted, especially the last few books. And so in the series itself, in the timeline, in the chronology of the books, he is constantly encountering these big supernatural phenomena that he cannot rationally explain. He is constantly trying to respond to this in some kind of reasonable way, but he's constantly being confronted with how much he doesn't know. And that's really what's going on with The Secret History of the World, except instead of giving us the very traditional Judeo-Christian answer of, very traditional notions of good and evil, Wilson is going outside of all of this, and he's saying, no, 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 there's a whole secret history to the world that's only one human explanation for it, and it's a meager attempt to try to understand what's really going on in this cosmic battle. And so Jack, he is being forced to confront these things, and it's pushing him to become not exactly a person of faith, but also to look at this and say, there is a lot more here than I can possibly understand. That my normal explanations, conventional explanations of what's real and what isn't, they don't work so well anymore. You've got this on a much smaller scale between Lyle and Charlie. So Lyle is the older brother and Charlie's the younger brother. Charlie, he is a born-again Christian. He's an evangelical Christian. He doesn't feel great about what they're doing with their psychic medium practice. Lyle is a rational humanist, and he has really no patience for Christianity or any kind of faith whatsoever. And yet, because of this ghost of Tara Portman, because of all of the strange things that are happening around the house, they are constantly being confronted with the supernatural. They're being confronted with things that don't make sense within science, within rationality, what we commonly use to understand what's real and what isn't real. And so as a result, you get this back and forth between the two brothers. And so you have other characters like Gia really goes into her own belief systems, and that she was raised Catholic, but then she's kind of moved away from the faith, and then she looks at evangelical Christians and she thinks that, like, while she doesn't really buy into it, she can't deny the fact that they seem to have a great deal of peace, that God is an active force in their lives, that they believe this, but she is not convinced by this, but she's confronted by that they seem to be content. They seem to have these answers. And that's definitely what's going on with Lyle and Charlie. Charlie definitely has got a whole lot more peace than Lyle does. And so for these, really the question seems to be, Wilson seems to be getting at this big question. Is hokum okay if it comforts people? And what I mean by this is, if something is not actually true, but a person believes that it's true, and it provides them comfort, and it provides them answers, even if that answer is incorrect, or even if they're believing a lie, but it gives them enough comfort that they're able to move on in life. Is that a good thing or not? Because that's essentially what's happening in this book. Lyle and Charlie are operating this psychic agency. They have people who come there, and they are desperate for answers. Is my loved one, like my deceased loved one, what's happening with them, or this person who disappeared from my life, are they okay, are they not okay? All of these big questions, and they're just tricking these people. They're fooling them. They don't actually have any answers, but at least not any real answers. So when they lie to them, when they give them these false answers, the people are comforted, and they seem to be able to move on as a result of it. So is that okay or not? Or if you're a person of faith, if you are a Catholic, if you are an evangelical Christian, and you believe that you have the answers, even if somebody knows for a fact that those are not the answers, but that is helping you personally in your life, is that a bad thing? How much does the truth actually help us? Right? Like, this seems to be the big question, because within this entire series, what you're dealing with is the secret history of the world, and it really is a type of cosmic horror, in the sense that the human mind cannot grasp what's happening there, and it would just drive us mad if we knew exactly what was going on, because it is just so much. You're dealing with intelligences that are so much bigger than ours, that are so superior, and forces that are so much bigger than ours, and it would just literally drive us mad if we were to even peripherally encounter it, to see it to some degree. We would go crazy as a result. So the thing is, that's essentially what's happening there is, well, we can't actually know the real truth, but we could get versions of it, small versions of the truth. And maybe that's enough to help people. but Jack is constantly being pulled out of that into what's really going on. So it's interesting. I feel like this is a fairly big topic, and I don't know how much I should get into it. But if you're wondering, if it's been a while since you've read the book, or if you have read it recently and you're wondering what to do with all these questions of faith that come up, I think it's interesting because there seems to be a really big movement within publishing in general, which says that there's this, I personally think that it is an unconvincing position, which says that we need to look at literature, and whatever literature says, that's where we get our morality from, right? And I just think that that's such a silly perspective. So it's this idea of, well, I can't read something if I disagree with, the political views of the writer. It's like, okay, but you're not turning to a piece of fiction to get your own political views. I mean, are you? Are you really just like constantly turning to that to find answers that you're looking for? Because I think for most people, then they're turning to fiction for fun, for entertainment, and to think, but they're not turning to it saying, you have all the answers, you gifted writer, please tell me the answers to life, the universe, and everything, right? To quote Douglas Adams. Is that really like what we're doing when we're reading a book? So I guess what I'm saying is, if you think that whatever your personal views are on religion or faith, if you think that that's going to get challenged by reading this, like, no, you get to, I think it's a pretty fair overview of what's happening to Gia as she's exploring her own views regarding faith, regarding religion. You get to see that with Jack because he's forced to confront this with the death of his sister. You get to see that with Lyle and Charlie. You get to see that with the secret history of the world. And I don't think that any one particular group is, being elevated or degraded in any way. But it's definitely a question that comes up. If you know that something that somebody else believes is just not true, does it matter if it's true or not, if it's actually helping them? And I think ultimately where this seems to get settled is it's okay as long as you are, not openly participating in that, right? So Jack talks about this idea of providing value for value, that you shouldn't sell something to a person if you know that it's absolutely false, that it's counterfeit. That if you were, let's say, a pastor of a church and you don't believe it, you shouldn't be a pastor of a church, right? But if you are a true believer, then there's nothing wrong with participating in that. I think that's ultimately what's happening here. It's not so much whether it's true or not, it's whether you believe it's true or not. And that seems to be the position that Wilson is taking with this. If you have thoughts on that, then please do let me know. So that's one of the big questions in this book, faith in the afterlife, and I think that absolutely has to do with the death of Jack's sister. He doesn't really get answers to this, but you do get to see that Tara Portman comes back, although not exactly like herself. So I don't know if that exactly answers it for him of what happens to Kate, but it seems that he's being forced to confront this to some degree. A small little thing, I'll try to point out a few small little things. This is the first post 9/11 book that has been published in the series, which plays a big role as you read the rest of the series, because you get into the other books and there's all kinds of stuff. There's all kinds of reasons why it comes up and why it's significant. For one thing, for somebody who is living below the radar, below officialdom, then with the inception of the Department of Homeland Security, the Patriot Act, all of these things that come after 9/11, Wilson is forced to bring those events of the real world into the series. But also what comes up as a result of this is you start getting more of a focus. I'm trying to remember, because it's been a while since I've read some of the other books in the series, but you do see the issue of terrorism, specifically from Middle Eastern terrorists and Islamist terrorists in the series. So this comes up where it really wasn't in the series until this point. Not that it comes up in the haunted air. But I'm saying there is a mention of the towers that have fallen, that you're now in a post 9/11 world, which situates us chronologically in terms of like where does this fit in terms of years. Somewhere around 2001, this book was published in 2002, and basically it goes for 2 years or so, less than 2 years, until we get to Night World within the story universe. So that's what we're dealing with, basically 2000 until 2003, somewhere around there. So that's just an interesting point that I wanted to mention. The other thing that comes up in this book, abuse of children. That's a big theme. It's a theme that comes up again and again in the series. This is not the first time that we've seen abuse of children. It came up in Legacies, where I can't remember the doctor's name, but I really can't remember what her name is. But in any case, then the doctor in that, then you find out that her father, of course, abused her and her brother. So we've seen it there before. And I can't remember if the Mikulski brothers show up in that at all. I don't think that they do. But at the end of this book, and I know this is not the only time that they come up in the series, then they are, Jack basically calls them in to deal with the other people in the circle. So the other people in the circle, besides Eli and Adrian, who are killed at the end of this, and Dimitri, who is already dead by the time this book takes place. But there's still, something like 10 other people involved in this. Well, they've obviously been killing one child a year, and Eli makes it very clear that some of them have got other interests in children besides just killing them to live forever, but he kind of forces them to not participate in those desires that they have, essentially like the sexual abuse of children. But then the Mikulski brothers, they come up at the end of this, and basically Jack just makes a call to them. We don't even really get to read this. He just makes a reference to it. Oh yeah, I know these two guys, the Mikulski brothers. I don't know why they have this, like what happened to them, what their backstory is, but they absolutely hate anybody who sexually abuses children, and they will make them suffer a lot and then kill them. And so, like I said, this is not the first time that it comes up in the series, and I think that that's worth pointing out, that this is definitely a theme that comes up. And I'm not exactly sure what to make of it, other than to say it's a theme, and I'm sure if you explore that theme, you're going to get some really interesting things that come up. Because I don't think that it's just an easy way of establishing that somebody's evil. There seems to be this whole other set of I don't know, depravity that comes along with the abuse of children that Wilson wants to confront the reader with. That there's the regular seedy, awful people that Jack is confronting. People who are willing to cheat people and steal and be violent and murder and all of that stuff. And it's like, there's all of them. And then there's the people who abuse children. And they are just so much worse, and they absolutely get theirs in the series again and again. Every time that happens, they get seriously punished for this. So it's interesting that comes up. The another theme that comes up in the book is it's not being directly confronted, but it's definitely abortion, because you find out that Gia is pregnant, and then when she first brings it up to Jack, she's worried about his response. She doesn't really give her own views on abortion, but for her personally, she would never abort her child. You find out that Jack would never abort his child. And then you've got the ghost of Tara Portman, who essentially wants to abort Gia's child. She says that she wants to just reach in there. It's just a bundle of cells and then squish them, right? That Gia won't even feel anything. And then what Tara can then do is the child will then be dead. And then Tara can then be a mother to that child, since she's already died. In the real world, she can never have her own children, so this is the only way that she can have a child, because she wants to be a mother. So this is why she's been trying to get Gia to go there. This is why the lady and the dog, at least one reason why the lady and the dog did not want Gia and Jack to go into the building. Now, the reason why I'm saying that this is dealing with abortion, but not directly, is you do get that very significant term. It's a bundle of cells. So people will justify abortion by saying, well, a fetus is just a bundle of cells. It's not a separate human being, right? That it does not constitute being a unique person and therefore does not have any rights, the right to life, because it is not actually a life separate from the mother, right? That would be the argument in favor of allowing abortion. And then on the other hand, see, the book is doing both things. So you kind of get this recognition that, okay, it's a bundle of cells, and what's the big deal if I just go in there and then just crush it? On the other hand, Tara is saying, if I do that, however, then that baby will then become my own child that I get to raise. So you're saying that it's a life. You're saying it's not just a bundle of cells then. So Tara is saying it's a bundle of cells, and then she's saying, but not exactly, because then it's a life, and then I would get to have it. And she's also making the argument really in favor of abortion. She's saying this to Gia, you can just get pregnant again. It's no big deal. So who cares if you lose this one? You can just go ahead and have another one. It's nothing to be concerned with. I'm not saying that Wilson is answering this question. He's not staking a position on this. He's not staking a pro-life or a pro-choice position, but he's bringing up the question. He's absolutely bringing up the question. And I think that you get that with Jack and Gia. It's not that they're exactly making their own position on whether they are pro-life or pro-choice, but they're saying for them personally, this is what they would do. And the whole question of when does life begin is getting explored in this. And I think to some degree, he's having it both ways. And I'm not saying that this is really Wilson, because I think that that's a really bad way to read a book, to say whatever a character says or thinks in a book is what the author thinks or says. I hate that. That is just flat out the worst form of literary criticism. Anybody who's doing that is wrong. That is the worst form of literary criticism. I can say this as an author. I have bad guys in my books who say things that I don't believe or think, right? That obviously I've imagined them, but I'm trying to think, what would bad people think, right? What would my villain be thinking here? That's not necessarily what I think is right. I don't have that belief. Even with my protagonist, I don't have that belief. So I'm not saying that Wilson is trying to have it both ways, but I'm saying within the book as a writer, then the characters within the book are essentially wavering on this question of when does life begin. And I think that that's significant in this book because it is dealing with faith and the afterlife. What happens after we die? With Kate, what happens after she dies? With Tara Portman, what happens after she dies? But beyond that, what happens before we are born? Are we a person then? And that's a big, big question, right? It's a huge question. Theologically, from a faith perspective, that's a huge question. Philosophically, it's a huge question. Metaphysics, like within that whole thing, that's a big question. Within science, that's a big question. Certainly, like from a legislative perspective, with laws, that's a big question of when does life begin, and it's being explored here. And it's like he kind of has it. He's approaching the topic, and then he backs right off. Right? Which is, I think that's probably the best way to deal with this, because really, like I say, anybody who's going to literature, specifically to fiction, and they're trying to get their own morality, their own political views, it's like, that's probably not the best place to go, right? Like, that's really, like, I don't think that you should be trying to get your morality from a piece of fiction. I don't think that you should be trying to get your political views from a piece of fiction. You can think through these ideas, but that certainly should not be the end point. That should not be the terminus of your thinking, where it's like you read a piece of fiction and then you're like, now I know what I believe. I believe what that short story says, or I believe what that book says. It can get you thinking about those things, but it shouldn't stop there. So it's like he's bringing up the question, but he's not really giving us answers, which I think is good. I think it's a good way to approach it. Okay. Let me see. What else did I want to talk about? In terms of the pregnancy, this whole question with Gia being pregnant, this now, of course, leads Jack to have to deal with what to do with becoming official, becoming an official part of society. And That's going to come up over the next several books because, of course, he has to take on a real identity, at least an identity that can hold up to scrutiny. If something should ever happen to Gia, and once she gives birth to the child, then you don't want that child to become a ward of the state. So by him becoming a father, it's pulling him, at least to some degree, into officialdom. All right, so there's that whole point. I have a couple other questions on this. Before I move on to just those small things, on page 171, you get the title of the book and where it comes from. So it's from a poem by Keats, and there's just a small part from it, an excerpt from the poem, which says, "Philosophy will clip an angel's wings, conquer all mysteries by rule and line, empty the haunted air, the gnomed mine." And so philosophy will clip an angel's wings, as in an angel has wings in our imagination. We can have that from as a matter of faith, but then philosophy comes along, or really science comes along, and then it says, here's why angels can't be real. Clip, the wings are gone, you can't believe this anymore. Here's like the haunted air. Science or philosophy will come along and it will empty it, that you will realize, oh, there is no such thing as a haunt. There is no such thing as a ghost. There is no such thing as spirits or gnomes or any of these things. That it will kill off all of those explanations that we have for what we consider to be supernatural phenomena. And it's it's really interesting that he's using that as the title of this book, because like I say, the book is very much concerned with big questions like faith and the afterlife, and then fitting that into the secret history of the world. I've got a big question here, and I really don't know what to do with this, so I would like a little bit of help on this one. So this is on page 371 of my edition, and you get a little bit of the history of Menelaus Manor, which is the house that Lyle and Charlie own, where they have their psychic practice. So there's a reference to this couple who buy the house, and one of them, so Herb Lom is his name, Herb Lom. He buys the house. They have this child. He's married to Sarah Lom, and the last name is Lom. And then basically, the child is mutilated and dies at the house. Herb goes to the hospital. He ends up dying, but it takes a little bit, and we don't know why. And then his wife, Sarah Lom, Sarah is spelled S-A-R-A with no H, and then L-O-M. So if you're a good Repairman Jack fan, then you're working through this and you're going, Rosalam. Okay, so she's got to be Rosalam, right? She disappears, but I don't get it. I just don't get it. I haven't read all of the Adversary Cycle books. I've read, I think, 3 of them, but not all of them. So I'm really, really confused if that's in like Reborn or Rebirth. I don't get it. Because Rosalam at this point is posing as Sal Roma, but as far as I understand, he can't change his physical appearance all that much, can he? And so how was he the wife? How is he Sarah Lom in this? I just don't get it. So if there's some kind of explanation for that, then I would appreciate it. And I just feel like I'm missing something there, because that's definitely Razalam. There's no way that Wilson put that in there with those letters without it being Rosalam, but I don't understand how it could be, because that would be, I think, the early 90s, so only like 10 years before this book is supposed to take place. So Sal Roma should only be, you know, in his like 20s or early 30s or something like that. I don't get it. So if you can help me out with that, please, because I'm kind of confused there. Another thing, this is just a small little thing, but I thought it was really, really brilliant. On page 386, then Charlie and Lyle, they're talking, and they're talking about God. When Lyle is talking about God within his dialogue, it's a lowercase g because he doesn't believe in God. But then when Charlie's talking about God, it's an uppercase G. And I think that that's a really good way of getting us understanding exactly what they're saying. I just really like that. I think it's a very clever way of indicating Charlie really believes in this, Lyle does not believe in this, and you can see it that when they're speaking it in Lyle's head, it's a lowercase g, and when Charlie says the word God, it's an uppercase G, because he really believes it, that there is only one God. So I just thought that was a nice little thing. It's something that I appreciated in the text. On page 499 in the book, I think that for Wilson, this was probably like not a very significant line. I don't think that he really, I'm not, this is not insulting. I don't think he worked too hard at this line, but I think it's a really great piece of text where it sums up the series really well. This is Jack who's speaking, and he's saying this to Elibolito, who has been killing these children, you know, year after year. And Jack is now, I think he's about to kill him at this point, like to turn him over to Tara Portman, who's going to torture him, presumably for a while before she ends up killing him. Where it says, Jack says, "What goes around comes around. Not nearly as often as it should on its own, but sometimes we can help it along. That's why I'm here." And I think that that is just such a great summary of the entire book series. That Jack is there to try to help that along a little bit. Essentially karma. That if you are doing bad, awful things, you should ultimately get punished for those things. And sometimes that punishment doesn't come right away. It doesn't come as quickly as we would like it to. And that's kind of where Repairman Jack steps in. He's like, oh, you've been doing this awful, horrible thing. Let me punish you for that, right? He's just going to give it a little push. And he likes to be involved as little as possible, right? He wants to be behind the scenes where he wants to bring about that person's downfall by their own choices as much as he possibly can, but he might give it just a little push. And I just think that's a really great summary of the series. What goes around comes around, not nearly as often as it should on its own, but sometimes we can help it along. That's why I'm here. So I just thought, oh, that's a great summary for the series. Another question that I have about this book is on page 407. I've got a couple of questions here. So Lyle, he ends up developing this ability where I think it's because of his interaction with Tara Portman, with the ghost, where he now essentially has developed real psychic abilities, where when he touches somebody, he gets a sense of other things that, like either their past, their present, and their future, right? Like any combination thereof. He learns all kinds of stuff about them that he really has no other way of knowing other than he has a psychic ability now, which is strange for him because he's been faking it the whole time and now he really has it. But then when he looks at Jack and like they talk, oh, should you touch me or not, right? And then it's like ultimately the decision is no, don't. I'd rather not have you know all those extra things about me. I don't even know what this power is that you have, whether it's real or not, whether you're seeing genuine things or not. In any case, but he says when he looks at Jack, then Jack is all fuzzy. And I'm not exactly sure why that is. If that's just because Jack has been appointed essentially by the Ally to be a guardian on Earth, and that his future is uncertain, whether he is going to ultimately survive and save the planet or not, keep it on the side of the Ally. I'm assuming that's what it's about. But my question is, does Lyle still see Jack as being fuzzy at the end of the book? I don't think that so. I think maybe it did get resolved in the book where he said that he's back in focus. But I don't know why that would be. Why was he fuzzy to begin with? And then if he does go back into focus, how come? The other thing too, and I don't think that this actually gets answered in the book, does Lyle still have powers? When he touches somebody, does he now have psychic abilities? Because we know that Charlie's in the house at the end of the book. But we don't know if Lyle still has these powers. So that'd be a good question, and I can't remember if it comes up later on in the series. So those would be some genuine questions that I've got about this book at the end. The other thing, too, that doesn't get answered is Elibolito. So he believes that he is actually like 200-something years old, and that by killing these kids, you know, one kid a year, that he is invincible and that he is now going to live forever. But it's unclear It's unclear in the text whether this is true or not. He's even unsure whether it's true or not. I think ultimately it's not true that he's been fooling himself, that he does not have that ability, because he's saying the only reason that he got hurt by Jack is because Jack must also be involved in the circle, that he must have a circle of its own where he's performing this ceremony every year. We, of course, know that this is not true, but we also know that Jack is not an ordinary person anymore since the twins died. So, was the guy invincible to some degree? I don't know. And Wilson doesn't really answer that, which I think is great. That you have a whole bunch in here where he just is not answering every single question that we might have. Again, this is just a little aside for myself personally. My own experience in publishing so far, I've encountered publishers who really, you can't win either way. If you answer every question, then they say, oh, well, you're telling the reader too much. But if you leave some things unresolved, then they say, well, you can't do that. You have to answer all of those questions. And you're just like, what do you want from me? I like that. I like the fact that like we don't actually get answers to all of those questions. I don't think that leaves the reader feeling unsatisfied. And even if you are unsatisfied with that, then it's like, okay, that's fine. Sometimes you're going to be unsatisfied, and that's actually a good thing. I don't think that it's necessarily a novelist. It's a novelist's job to satisfy you in every single way. Like, just give me exactly what I want as a reader, and if I don't like something, you better change it and you better fix it in your next book. It's, as George R. Martin says, writing is not a democracy. The fans don't get to just dictate to the writer, this is exactly what I want, now give it to me. You're not commissioning this. And so anyway, I like that we don't have all of the answers there. And so, but it's an interesting question. Is he actually immortal or not? And the other thing, which I've touched on, but it's interesting, this is, I think, the first reference that we get to a timeline of where we're at in the series in terms of Nightworld and the coming apocalypse, essentially. And we haven't really seen this until this point, and now you're getting this timeline that's coming along with it. So the book overall is great. It's really interesting. I think it's the longest one so far in the series. It's that one or Host, one or the other. And there's a lot going on. I said this in my short spoiler-free review video for it, that it's very much a supernatural mystery, because you don't actually know what's going on for much of the book. You don't know who Tara Portman is, and even at the end, you get a fair bit of a surprise with her and Gia when you find out that she wants Gia there, not because she wants a mother, but because she wants Gia's baby, so that way she can be a mother. But the whole thing reads like a supernatural mystery. You're trying to find out a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. Unlike the other books in the series, which are very much thrillers, where you know what's going on, you know what the villain wants, you know what all of these competing characters are all striving for, and you see how they all get connected, but you are well aware of what's happening. In this one, you're actually denied a fair bit, and I think that's why it works so well, where you're denied a lot of those answers to those questions that I have, because the book itself is operating much more in the realm of being a mystery, and specifically a supernatural mystery, than a thriller, which again I think is great. That's one of the things that I love about the series, is that it certainly is, you're not dealing with repetitive books. He's doing something interesting and different in each one. Okay, so those are my thoughts on The Haunted Heir. Like I say, Gateways is the next book in the series. So in Gateways, then Jack, he's getting out of New York City. He goes down to visit his dad in Florida. So that's going to be the next review in the series. All right. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.